so many times the rocks were just big enough I couldn't quite handle them. I break them in two at that point in the sledge, and you can handle them. The last person that was killed out there, a man named Red Radford, and the roof fell on him and killed him. I don't remember what year that was, but it's been a long time ago. And as I said earlier, they used to, when they blew that, dynamited that stuff from the wall, why they went clear to the blue, they called it the blue shale, on top and on the bottom. Well, they didn't have any way to hold the ceiling together. Sometimes it would fall. A lot of times it would fall. Now, in later days, they use screws to ever so often. They drill up into that and put screws in it to hold that from falling. And in the mornings, as I said earlier, they had roof testers come in, and I think their names. One of them was my wife's grandfather, George Reed, and another one was Roy Stavelman. And they, many years, they worked together, checking the roof.
This is November 5th, year 2007, and we are interviewing Bonnie Feldhausen. She lives west of Frankfurt, so we're going to talk to her about her experiences at the Gypsum mine.
I think they wanted me to tell who I was. I was Bonnie Tibbet. Lived all my life in the Bigelow, Irving area. Our properties were all taken out with Tuttle Creek. So then I consequently switched to Frankfurt area. Went to school there, graduated there, married there, still there. I started to work for Georgia Pacific in 1960, and I was to go to work in August, the first Monday in August, for them. Hired by Art Roy, who I'm sure anybody watching may remember. Hired by Art Roy, and I went home thinking, oh gosh, I got this good job, I'm okay. We were farming at the time, and so this young couple needed this good job. So Saturday night, the plant burnt down. So there was no job to go to. But, you know, being just 18 and not really knowing what you should do in a case like that, I goes over Monday morning amidst all the confusion with the insurance people and the smoke still smoking and the fire trucks there and Art looking like he was just in a daze. And I walked in the door and I said, they said, who are you? And I said, well, I'd come to see Art Roy. Well, we don't think he's got time. I said, okay, I really do need to see him. And so he came out and he says, who are you? I thought, oh, golly. And I said, you told me to come to work this morning. Well, I don't need you to work this morning. He says, can't you see? And that wasn't like Art because he was a very nice, calm person. I'll call you when we're ready. What did I hire you for? And I said, well, as the receptionist and a secretary, I think. I'll call you. And so I went home, and then I just kind of sat and wondered. You know, for a young person, you don't know what to do next. So I didn't call back. And finally he called, and when they opened the plant up on the hill, of course they had to kind of open it fast then. And when they opened the plant up on the hill, I went to work in the first part of December there. So I wasn't out of work too long, but anyway, it was a great way to start. I always told them they burnt the plant down trying to get rid of me, but I was persistent and I came back. So, and this would be the old plant before it burned, which was a wonderful plant with all the old wood timbers.
There's a glare.
If you can see that. This would have been down below the hill, and it was just really basically totally destroyed.
Is it okay now?
They could use some of the equipment. They did bring some of the equipment up to the new plant, but they had to get it ready in a hurry. The office building still stood where I was supposed to go to work because it was down to the south, away from the main timber.
Would you show that picture again, please?
Sure. Down in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So on December, I believe it was the 5th or 6th, anyway, it was whatever the first Monday in December was that year, I went out and went to work up there. And when I went to work, I was hired for receptionist, secretary, and switchboard operator. And this was my switchboard. And I have no idea how old it was because it had been down to the old plant for quite a while since they built what was their new office then. So I have no idea as to really the age, but I know it was really nice and in good operation in the 60s. So we kept it a long time, And I don't know about you guys, but anybody that calls companies now would love to have this, I'm sure, on the other end, because somebody answered it, and they said, what could I do to help you? And they stayed with you till they got you the right person. There was no punch 1, punch 2, punch 3, and none of them right. So I think most people would like us to go back to this, so you could say, I just really need help and I need so-and-so.
So then you would have, different people would have certain numbers.
Basically, all the offices and all the areas in the plant had numbers, and you can still, I know you can't see, excuse my back here, I know you can't see them on the video, but at the time we had 3 incoming lines, and then we did have a couple of extra outgoing ones that couldn't be used coming in so we could get out. And you answered by just opening the phone receiver's missing, but you just opened the key, you answered it with the left cord, which is a little dusty now, and you put it whoever you were after, you put it in their phone, and then you could ring any way you would like till you got them. So they generally knew when it was the operator, because I stayed on there, depending on how serious the call was, I guess.
And whether or not you had
And then
more
you just-
incoming
When you
calls.
got them, you just
Now,
switched it.
were those lights, did they blink?
Yes, these lit up when they come in, and it rang.
So you had them, well,
Yeah.
connected with the telephone people. You didn't have
Right.
electricity for it.
Yeah, see, it was the telephone, this is the switch. And so this would light up, and you could answer it, find out who they wanted, and then you plugged it in. Or you can listen to see if it was busy before you plugged it in, and of course it lit up then. And once they answered, you could shut the key, and then they had a private conversation.
And then as soon as the lights quit blinking up there,
Well,
you knew
the
that they'd
lights would
hung
come
up.
on, they would blink, and you'd know they'd hung up.
And so you could disconnect.
And so it really, really worked well. If you had emergencies, you could butt in on their phone call. You know, you didn't normally make a practice of it, but, and we could put several on at the same time. It was really,
Is there a difference in the coloring of the casings? There's orange.
originally,
Oh, okay.
they were in pairs, like there would be 2 reds, 2 grays, so you didn't pick up the wrong one that went with each pair.
Those are pairs, sure.
Yes,
Sure.
there's some of them missing now, and I see we had some that got changed over the years, but
Yeah.
it really is pretty slick. And when we quit using it, it was very workable, and so I asked the telephone company what it would take to get it. And he said, Gene Lott, actually, from Blue Rapids, said if they'd give you permission, I don't think it'll take anything. But he said, I'll have to find out. So he came back and he said, they say just give it to you, and they'll send you the paperwork, which right at the moment I can't find, but.
Whittle up here someplace.
It's
And,
with their phone
To
receiver.
show that, to show that it was legitimately mine and that I hadn't taken it or something. And Gene said they say you can have it. There's only one extra deal. You have to take all of the equipment in the basement with you, which they hadn't said, but it was going to be such a job because equipment had actually, been put in before all the finish work was done down there, and it was really heavy. So I said, well, that's no problem. My husband would be glad to do that. Well, I'm not sure he was because it took about 6 men, but they finally got all of the equipment out of the basement because, back in those days, even computers were massive,
Oh, sure.
and the equipment was really, really big. So he came over with a crew of 4 or 5 other farmers, and they got all the stuff. They pounded, and they got it all out downstairs and carted it all upstairs and took it away, and I got the switchboard, which I always intended to use in the house because Gene said there'd be no problem. I could hook it up, as if it was my regular phone. So I was really looking forward to it, but my house is just too small.
Yeah.
And it's taken me all these years to decide that.
Yeah.
So when the Blue Rapids, when they are going to get their museum, I thought, what better place for it than here?
Which we appreciate.
So I don't know what was before it, if there was anything. I don't imagine that there was anything there was any switchboard or anything before it. I think they just had to, once they built the office building, then they had it. And I have no idea how old the office building was. Anyway, it has, it's had some great stories over the year. When I went to work, Dave Peart was the plant manager, and Art Roy was the office manager.
Now, is Art Roy related to
Vera Page, that's her
father?
brother.
Her brother.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And we've We had headquarters all over the United States. When I went to work, it was in Paoli, Pennsylvania. Then it moved to Portland, Oregon, and then down to Atlanta, Georgia, under the name of Certainty, Bestwall, and Georgia Pacific, and it's Koch Industries. I'm not sure they put it in the name.
Seems like they have an LLD at the end, or
Yeah, I think, a lot of times they do that because people are familiar with a brand name, and if you switch on them, they think they have a different product. So, anyway, it was interesting, but the fire just about kept me from getting my job.
so if you were hired as a switchboard operator, then and secretary, so you had
And receptionist.
and receptionist, so you had a lot going on
Well,
in a day's work.
probably.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
busy, but
Mhm.
so then I ended up, of course, taking early retirement in 1996. They announced a program for 55 years, and so I was gone. so it was a good place to work, and it's been good. When we opened the plant in 1960, basically it was Blue Rapids people.
Oh.
In those days, they didn't travel that far, for jobs. And basically, it was Blue Rapids people, and it was really like a big family for years. Well, and a lot of more family. There was a lot of father and son combinations, a lot of brothers.
See, and they kind of went away with that from
As,
that, didn't
as
they?
the years have gone by, most companies would prefer not to have that. And it's probably a good idea, but it was a very close relationship. They had good working relationship.
On the average, how many worked out there?
It
And then-
varied so much, anywhere from, the 80s to 120 or 125. Of course, now there's quite a lot more than that, but I'm not sure what the count is right now, but I know it's a lot more than that.
Mhm.
But,
So
I
did you
guess
have a
that's about
connection with the people down in the mine area then? What, did they have a certain?
They have, they had numbers just like everyone else. And of course, we also had a direct emergency line out for them so they could get help. And we talked about Oscar Weir, which he was one of our favorite people in the mine and had been there for years. And he was really a typical miner, which this picture really shows, I think, if you can get it. But if you were going to draw a picture or paint a picture of a miner, Oscar would have been it.
That, at the bottom there, it says he was hired a 9/11/1950 and retired 10 of 87, 1987.
And Oscar was, capable. He was a mechanic in the mine, basically, was his job, but he was pretty much a jack of all trades because he'd been there so long. And at one time, he got burned really badly, and I can't tell you what the voltage was, but he stuck a screwdriver in what you and I would say a plug-in socket, but it was a high voltage one. And they called up and they said, Oscar's badly, badly burned. And of course, immediately I got an ambulance on the way. But he called me back and he says, now girl, that was his favorite. Now girl, I'm just fine, girl. And I said, Oscar, they're bringing you up, the ambulance is on the way. I can get up there by myself. Well, he did, but some of the guys came with him. But for me, he was just really a kid at that time. It was a real shock when he walked in because he was just totally burnt black, just burnt to a crisp. And he was still talking to me and still talking to me, girl. And he says, you hear what I did? I'm thinking, please hurry. And about the same time as he got there, the ambulance did. So that rescued me, not necessarily him, but it rescued me. So I guess that's about all.
I saw some names on some of those. Can you talk about the men whose
Up here on top.
connections you made who were getting calls? Who else was working
guys,
there?
Well, of course, Ed Kittner and Wilbur Page would have been in the head of the lab at that time, and I'm sure most people remember Ed. Jack Roush would have been in the lab. Trying to think of some of the older ones they would remember. If I'd have known you were going to ask me
Orville,
that, I would.
Orville, how about Orville Thomas?
Orville
Was-
Thomas, he would have been in several places, probably the mine at that time. But, just, it was a really good group.
Colonel
Colonel Davis, he was before my time.
Before, okay.
Yes,
That was the name.
yes, and of course Ed Kittner, he was one of a kind too because he grew up back east. Country wasn't his thing, And the guys were always giving him trouble. And his very first job, that when they hired him, he graduated as an engineer from K-State. His very first job was to buy mules for the company. He didn't know a mule from a cow, from a pig. Ed had no idea, and they sent him to buy mules, and he always laughs. He said, and he thought, I needed a degree for this, you know. But he was the brunt of a lot of Polak jokes, which he dished back pretty well. But he and Mary were very, very good people to work with.
Did Gloria Moore start working out there?
Gloria came, let's see, I can't remember what year, but she came several years later. And there are still a couple of the girls, Melody Sedevy, Nick Sedevy's wife, which some of the local people would know, and Deb Swindeman from Marysville. And of course Charlie Repke, when I was the office manager, Charlie Repke worked for me, Deb, Melody, and Gloria. And then we had several other girls that were kind of come and went, but those were all there all the time.
Merck family? Did they?
Lots of Mercs.
Clay Camps?
Yes, and lots of Clay Clamps, Gary Clay Camp. Larry Clay Camp and Pierce Hallman, when I left, were the head of the white mill departments, which is really, they did a good job, you know. So there was a lot of local people now. Everybody came practically new in the 60s when they opened the new plant. And so therefore, they all have just about retired now. They all also retired at the same time.
They
So
didn't have any severe accidents or lose anybody in those 36
We never had
years.
a death in the years that I was there, no. You know, we had a few accidents. Basically, probably as many above ground. You think of the accidents below ground, but we basically would have had as many small accidents above ground as below. No fatalities, you know, no permanent disabilities. A few men have permanent back disabilities, but it was a combination of both work and other things. It, you know, wasn't a immediate thing.
Idris Tiefel.
Idris was there for years.
He was in
He
the
was
mine.
in the mine.
Mine down. Mine.
And he would be a wonderful one to have tell Oscar's stories, and he would be good at the mine. Yes.
Dick